Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy New Year and welcome back to another edition, the first edition of 2026 of Alley Talk here on Philly Sports Network. As you know, we are a Phillies based podcast here weekly on Fridays at 2 p.m. throughout this 2025 season, and we hope to continue the same on 2026 as part of the Philly Sports Network and Metro Philly Podcast Network. Make sure you give us a follow down there on the ticker at Philadelphia SN on X, at Philly Sportsnet on Blue Sky, Philly Sports Network and Metro Philly on Instagram. Give us a follow there. Make sure you go over to Philly Sports Network on YouTube if that's not where you're watching to check us out moving forward. Got a few topics to cover today. No new news if you haven't watched since the last episode prior to the holiday, but a couple things still on the minds of Phillies fans in the front office. JT Realmuto, still no decision made on his future and whether he'll be returning to Philadelphia, donning the red pinstripes once again behind the plate for the Phils. And, of course, the not elite shirt drama. We'll touch on it briefly before we do a little wrap-up going into the new year to see how their top competition in the National League East has worked to improve their rosters, just as the Phillies have done theirs. So we've spoken at length about what the Phillies have done, an entire bullpen makeover. They out with the old, in with the new, as far as one-year flyers in the outfield are concerned, with Adolis Garcia coming in to be the right fielder. You'll likely have some young guns, Justin Crawford, Andrew Painter, maybe even an Aiden Miller at some point in 2026. But before we get to all of that, let's start things off with the latest and greatest on JT Realmuto. So, as far as the latest and greatest on JT Realmuto goes, well, all the predictions still point to the Phillies bringing him back. The question is, at what rate and for how long? For most, if the conversations continue to drag on, do the Phillies stick with their guy? And we're going to start with the why to stick with your guy first. We'll touch on that moment, on the rest of it momentarily. But JT, enough cannot be said about how valuable he is to the pitching staff, how valuable he is to the young players on this team, how valuable he is to any young catchers they may bring in to the organization in the future. The guy's value goes well beyond what he does at the plate, and that's what he was originally brought in for, and not only an elite defensive catcher, but an elite offensive player, especially for the position. Not still that same guy that he once was, however, can still get hot and make an impact. I think there was a week where I had said, oh man, is JT done? And that's when his hot streak started, texting my dad and my brother. So a little bit of stuff to work through there. However, ultimately, whether he is the same offensive profile or not, the guy is invaluable when it comes to the locker room, when it comes to the pitching staff. And knowing that you're going to have some changes and a young stud coming up in Andrew Painter, I think it is valuable to have the stud in JT Realmuto on the team. So that's my take as far as whether they should bring him back. Interesting note already from Alex in the comments. The longer it takes, the less likely he's coming back. I'm not too sure about that, Alex. I do understand what you mean as far as, the longer it takes, are they just going to – I'm curious on your thoughts. So is it the longer it takes, the more likely they are to move in a different direction? Or is it that if he wanted to come back, he would have just accepted a deal and come back already? I think that he wants to see his market. It's the last chance he has to make real money in the game. And yes, you want to win, but you need to view the market as a whole. And there's not a lot of options as far as alternative catchers right there. So I think that it's a tough place to be for them as far as the timing of JT's free agency, because there's not a whole lot of other options out there. Catching depth is at a premium. So a lot of people are assuming that the offer out to Realmuto is maybe in the 2-year, $30 to $35 million range. A lot of people have talked about maybe you just need to give him the third year to get things done. But a report from a great writer for 97.5 The Fanatic, Colin Newby, great guy, great writer, great reporter, He does a lot of their digital stuff and he does a lot of their articles on 97.5thefanatic.com. So go give him a check out. But right before the holiday, he had written an article, and he said that uh, the he had some good notes. So his first note was from Jason Stark when he was on 97.5 speaking about the importance of JT. You can't have a player like this who has been the best catcher in baseball conversation for this long and is this important and just underpay him because you think that you can. It's trying to figure out not just what he's worth, but what you need to pay him to make him feel like he's appreciated. And people may uh, scoff at the idea of make him feel appreciated, but that's important, especially in such a thin market for such an important position, to make sure that the guy feels appreciated. And one thing that really stood out in Colin's article, they said when he had originally negotiated his 5-year deal back in 2021, he had apparently had an asking price of over $200 million. Now that the years are not clear on that, but his former agent Jeff Berry told Baseball Tonight that he and Realmuto felt the negotiations unfairly belittled the veteran catcher's unique durability and intangible strengths that the Phillies and the other 29 franchises were clearly aware of. A direct quote from Jeff Berry: "We lost based on another nonsensical backroom arbitration precedent that catchers can only be compared to other catchers to determine salary. This blew my mind away. This blew JT's mind away." So while this is not a direct note from Berry saying that he felt disrespected, it very clearly points towards that. And there's been a lot of conversation about the arbitration process and how it can sour sour players on teams based on how those front offices have to speak about them in these negotiations. So which is a lot of times why agents and players will do anything they can to avoid that negotiation, even signing 1-year deals at the 0 hour before that arbitration process comes. If you remember the Ryan Howard saga, and he ended up signing a massive $25 million a year deal to stay in Philly. I think it was back in the first year of it was 2010, I believe. He spoke highly about getting to the arbitration process multiple times and how he felt slighted, and that those were things that he would not forget. Ricky Bottalico, former Philly and current host for both 97.5 and NBC Sports Philadelphia, he said that arbitration is just a fight between basically the team and the player. That's really what it comes down to, and they all try and state their case. It's like analytics. You know how they throw out numbers for anything, and they can make numbers prove certain things. That's what each side tries to do. They go to court. But the team has spoken very highly of him, obviously. You know, Thompson's called him the backbone of the team, the captain of the team, and the pitching staff in the past. But it cannot be lost on people that Realmuto may feel disrespected based on what they discussed previously. And now, even if he does ultimately return to Philly, is out to prove a point that, like, I know that teams shouldn't be in the business of paying for past performance. But to me, you almost have to, if it's the difference between keeping this guy in Philadelphia and allowing him to walk and maybe signing with, God forbid he signs with a division rival, and we'll get to the division rivals later in the show. But the biggest question still sitting for Philadelphia, out of the assumed people that they're targeting, is what is JT Realmuto going to do? Now, of course, they could pivot. They could go to looking at a Victor Caratini or a Mitch Garver, someone of that ilk that's been around the block, a defensive first catcher, maybe not someone who stands out in the bunch, but definitely has some experience under their belt. You know, Christian Vasquez has had some big moments for Houston and Boston in the playoffs in the past. I know Danny Jansen signed already, but he would have been a nice veteran piece. Beyond that, though, like I said, Mitch Garver, Jacob Stallings, Martin Maldonado, if you want to go. Oh, actually, he retired. Never mind. Jonah Heim, if you want to take a flyer on him, maybe figuring it out for a year and then spend the season in the offseason figuring out ways to build that depth behind the starter and just give Stubbs or Marchand a shot at being the backup and playing probably closer to a 50-50 share. That's the big thing that's missing with JT Realmuto, is his durability behind the plate is insane. And you don't see people catching at the rate that he's catching anymore. And the importance that he brings to the team is just it's just something that cannot be overlooked. I want to move to the comments real quick as a transition. Our guy, Steven Garrison, who's joined us the last few episodes, he feels like we should be moving on from He clarified JT in the next comment, but moving on from JT, trade for Adley, sign Caratini, use that money to trade Bohm and sign Bichette. This guy is all over the place, Steven, but we love the passion. We'll get into how they could spend that money a little bit differently, but I am very curious. Do you feel like the Phillies need to bring back JT Realmuto, or can they afford to be much lesser off at a certain position, and then hopefully the coaching and the pitching staff can do what they need to do? But like I said before, the big thing for me and a way that this could go south for them is, does JT feel disrespected at this time, based on past arbitration process? And we know how deathly or how horribly wrong the arbitration process can go from a relationship perspective. So knowing, based on Colin's report, that they had this beef in the past, and with his wonderful quotes directly from JT's former agent giving that context, can you really afford to move on from him? And on the flip side, will you be able to afford him and still feel comfortable with making moves in the margins the rest of the way? Because there are some holes still to be filled, whether it's starting pitching depth, bullpen depth, an additional player to take a flyer on the infield or outfield, whatever the case may be. So let's get this out to the people. Just sending out a quick tweet real quick. Apologies for the radio silence. Could his past issues with the arbitration? Alrighty, so we got that out. Yeah, it's again, but it's going to be tough. What should they do as far as focusing on JT? And do you just accept, hey, we might be worse there, but we can use this money to maybe make some other impactful decisions? They still have discussions around Alec Bohm. Would he be someone they would be comfortable moving on from? If there's a Ketel Marte package out there available, would they feel comfortable with moving on from Bryson Stott and saving a little bit of money? There's a few options out there. I think it's safe to assume that they're not going to save any money on the Nick Castellanos contract at this point. I think that if they decide to move on from him, it's going to be a release, and he'll sign as for a veteran minimum somewhere else. But either way, I don't think it's very promising. Steve, before I move on to the next topic, I do want to get your latest. I know you have a lot of comments in here. So, not a huge fan of Schwarber, I see, but the of the Schwarber re-signing just for the money purposes, I assume. But yeah, the Ketel Marte package could be something that he's interested in. They could have moved Bryce to first base and brought in Alonso at first base. And then instead of bringing in Kyle, now that's even money. You would have had that done. Bryce is a guy who definitely wants to be out in that field every single day, and I don't think the team's willing to move him to right. So I think that maybe Alonso would have been the DH, but I'm splicing hairs here. I think they wanted their clubhouse leader in Kyle Schwarber back regardless. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that alternative history or alternative theory, but yeah, a trade package for Ketel Marte is one that a lot of fans have been interested in. I know he had some off the field stuff, but if this clubhouse is as strong as they say it is, that should not be a problem for the Phillies if they see a path there without trading two of their top three prospects in Miller, Crawford, and Painter. I wouldn't go two of those guys in a package. Maybe you could go a little bit different. Alex with a great note here. The team is already old, so if you bring in 32-year-old Ketel Marte, who has a few years left on his deal, who's missed some games each of the last few seasons, whether it be for injury or personal reasons. Yes, when healthy, he's the best second baseman in the game. But they could use some help in that outfield. They could use some help elsewhere. Maybe Cattell could play third if they wanted to save the extra money on Bohm. But I think the Bohm market's going to play out based on what happens with either Bichette or Alex Bregman. I think once one of those two guys signs, that will be the trigger for people to pivot back to Philly, give them a call. Hey, we missed out on one of our guys. We either didn't like the other guy that much, or we see what the price is and we think that's going to be too expensive for our blood, but we'll give up some prospects for Bohm and see what happens. And then maybe Philly could pivot to the other guy. So if Bichette signs, maybe you would trade Bohm to I don't know, the Yankees or to the Red Sox, and then the Phillies could sign Bregman, or vice versa. If Bichette goes to Boston, or Bregman goes to back to Boston, and teams who wanted him, they may defer somewhere else. Angels seem to be a popular topic for all of the third base talk. They seem to be heavily linked to Kazuma Okamoto, who's I believe Sunday wraps up his posting. The Japanese stars not getting the huge contracts that the guys from the last few years did, especially the Yamamoto contract. But you're talking about a guy who had 3 consecutive MVPs in Cy Young, so not exactly the same as the guys who are coming over now. But Tatsuya Imai off the table now for the Phillies. He signed a 3-year deal with the Astros, but an opt-out after each season. Not the style of contract that the Phillies like to give, so understandable why. Maybe they sign him next year if they feel like they need some additional starting pitching, or heck, maybe Ranger Suarez's market is slow and they can pivot some of the money from JT and go back after Ranger Suarez on a shorter prove-it deal with an opt-out or something along those lines. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But the big thing that I wanted to touch on, and we didn't touch on in the past episodes, was that great piece from Colin Newby over at 97.5 The Fanatic, where he really brought those additional details that I hadn't been seeing everywhere else from the agent, where he said that they had been frustrated by prior years' negotiations. So good additional info to share with all of you. Appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you give us a follow. That's my handle there on all socials at Kyle Fisher 45, at Philadelphia SN. Follow on Blue Sky at Philly Sports Network. And also, for those out there, I'm going to bring this one up for you real quick. I have a new podcast. That's right. Me and my brother, Brotherly Glove, a Philly sports podcast for the true diehard fans. So if you get a chance, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this today. Go follow us on socials at Bro Glove Podcast on X, at Brotherly Glove Podcast on Instagram, at Brotherly Glove Pod on YouTube. Yes, we tried to get them the same. No, they weren't all available. We'll work on it. However, if you want to get no nonsense, definitely give us a shot there. Brotherly Glove, brand new show. My brother and I, 30 plus years of sports media work and 80 years of brotherly fandom in the Philly sports arena. So make sure you give us a follow over there. Like I said, make sure you give some of our co-hosts who have been with us in the past a follow. Make sure you're following at Corey Nido, at Corey_Nido on X. He is a wonderful partner, and he's our lead Eagles writer, one of our top Phillies writers. Did a ton of coverage of the minor league players this past year, so make sure you go check him out for the latest and greatest on Crawford Painter. If you have any questions, he's a great interaction. He also does a daily show called Eagles Latest, so make sure you check him out on YouTube when you're done with our show. Anyway, Steve Garrison, hey, we can talk, buddy. I did that myself. I don't know what I'm doing, so we can talk off the air. Shoot me a DM on Twitter at Kyle Fisher 45 if you're on there. If not, shoot me a DM on YouTube and we'll talk. Maybe we can figure something out because I'll take all the help I can get trying to get this thing off the ground. Anyway, let's get back to the actual nitty gritty and the actual Phillies talk. Once I get a sip, hold on. All right, before we do. Please don't do that, Alex. I saw your comment. I'm not even going to put it on the screen. Don't do that to me. This would be an interesting. Now, before I get into the next topic, Miguel Andujar, I didn't like the idea. I believe it was Ben Silver who mentioned signing Miguel Andujar on this show earlier in December. And at the time, I wasn't really into it. And then the more podcasts I listened to, and the more experts I listened to, and the more I dove into this guy's baseball reference page, and the more I saw what he has done in the past and what he's been able to change his game into, I don't hate it. He came out as a decent left fielder, which is not always easy to do, even transitioning from the corners in the infield. We saw how rough it looked at times for Edmundo Sosa, even with the great robbery of a home run in his first game out in left field. However, still not the ideal candidate. And Andujar has made a really good transition out there. He played very well last season, finishing with a 318 batting average. He had a 285 for Oakland the year before. Last season, 318, 352 on base, 470 slug. Not his best slug ever, but an 822 OPS, something he hasn't touched since he was a rookie, playing full-time at 23 years old, finishing second in the Rookie of the Year voting for the New York Yankees. He had 10 homers, 44 RBIs. He stopped trying to be the big pop, big bomber like he first came up. That rookie season, 47 doubles, 27 homers, and only 97 strikeouts while hitting 297 looked like a star of the future. They figured him out a little bit. He has in turn figured himself out a little bit and is a contact first guy with some decent on base, which is something that the Phillies could use, especially with their swing happy outfield. I know we're going to see what Justin Crawford does, and I think he's going to be a great on base guy as well. But Miguel Andujar feels like a guy who would be the perfect platoon partner with Brandon Marsh out there in the outfield. And I know that maybe I'm not giving enough credit to some of the young guys. I'm sure Corey Naito curses me every time I leave out the fact that Otto Kemp has been mentioned as a potential partner for Brandon Marsh out in the outfield, because Otto Kemp, all he did in the minor leagues was hit, and he hit pretty well, especially at home after getting called up to the majors in 2025, about midway through the season. Really earned his spot, and I know that the team likes him a lot. The front office likes him a lot. So obviously he is a guy who will get run. But if you want something more of a guarantee, or you want to go with someone who's shown you something, excuse me, goodness. He not only did he hit 290 against right-handed pitching this past season, he hit 389 against left-handed pitching. The thing that Brandon Marsh cannot do, this guy excels at. And yes, I know that Otto Kemp could be used in that spot, and he had a very, very great split last year as well. I'm actually going to look it up for you guys, so I'm not BSing you. But Brandon, Miguel Andujar better against righties if he gets stuck in there. Whereas, if you go look at Brandon Marsh's splits from this past season, great run after getting called back up from the minors, but really struggled against lefties once again. Only 88 plate appearances against lefties, but you can see why when you see the slash line, a 197, 287, 289 slug lefty on lefty for Brandon Marsh. He hit 300 with a 356 on base and a 482 slug. Good for an 838 OPS against righties, though. So wonderful numbers against righties. Really, really struggled against lefties. And again, we went over Andujar's numbers against lefties. He dominated them. Obviously saw a lot more plate appearances against righties. That's just how it works naturally. But man, was he impressive last season for both the A's and the Reds. But just taking a look at Otto Kemp's splits now that we have those up. Otto Kemp against lefties hit 231, 324, 462 slug in limited time. A 235, 285, 386 slug against righties. But I think with some more regular playing time, and now that he's gotten his feet wet at the major league level, you're talking about a smaller guy who doesn't necessarily have a perfect position and is figuring a lot out. And he was undrafted at one point, and he's 26, so he's a little bit older for getting his first call up this past season. there's a lot to figure out, but the guy has worked his tail off and has rocketed through the system in the last couple of years. No reason to think he wouldn't still improve. So he is an option out there, but I love, before we get to the next topic, the mention of Andujar. So back to the comments. Here we go. Johnny, my co-host on Brotherly Glove, bro. Schwarber was drafted as a catcher. Problem solved. Boom. There you go. Put him back there. You know who else was drafted as a catcher? Bryce Harper. So you want to move people talking about moving Bryce Harper back to right field. Why not just move him back to catcher and we'll figure the rest out from there? I love it. I love it. Alex, before we move on, the biggest failure of this Phillies era is the inability to find someone to hit behind Harper between now and the July deadline. Who's the guy to fix that problem? And if they don't find someone, can they realistically win the World Series? I mean, they put themselves in a position to do so last year, outscored the Dodgers, even though they lost that series, and held the MVP to his worst numbers over a 4-game stretch. I mean, they dominated Shohei Ohtani. The Dodgers barely scraped by them, and they didn't have anybody to hit behind Bryce Harper then. Now, I think the biggest change that they'll make, Alex, they tried this at the beginning of last season, is you will see a scenario where I believe Bryce Harper will hit 2 and Kyle Schwarber will hit 3 to start the year. So I think you go Trey, Bryce, Kyle. Kyle is that protection for Bryce, and then you hope one of whoever's hot at the time, Adolis Garcia, Alec Boehm, JT Realmuto, or a replacement for one of those two guys, so catcher or third base, whoever that ends up being. I think that could be the way to go. See, another shout from the Brotherly Love co-host, Johnny Fisher. Great call, Steven Garrison. I'd love Miguel Andujar. Again, showed a lot of pop at one point in his career, but I love the contact first approach, the high on base approach that he's had these last couple years. Don't like the lefty back to back either, Steve. But the one thing I'll say is go back to those to that peak team with Rollins, Utley, Howard. They had Utley and Howard hitting 3 and 4 forever. At one point, Bobby Abreu was up there mixed in with them. Both Jimmy and Shane are switch hitters, so there was times where they, in theory, against the right-handed pitcher, had 4 left-handers in a row starting that lineup off. I'm not too worried about that when you have players of that caliber. I think that having, especially with the evolution that Schwarber has shown in his game the last couple seasons, turning himself from a true 3 outcome guy into a guy who can reliably hit lefties, can reliably hit relievers, has really gotten his on base focus back up. His plate discipline is once again at a peak. He's playing some of the best ball he's played, and he seems to be getting stronger every season. I know you can't rely on that forever. But when you have those 3 guys packed at the top, I do agree they need a better cleanup hitter behind them. But that better cleanup hitter could easily be Alec Boehm and what he's done in the past. I mean, I know that last year was a down year. I understand that Alec Boehm, and if you want to get on him about moping or whatever the case, but this guy has worked tirelessly to get better on the defensive end so he actually could have a place on this roster. He had back-to-back seasons with 97 RBIs. He's added muscle. He's tried to add speed. He's a much better fielder, and his on-base percentage has gotten a little bit better these past couple years. He's a career 279 hitter, and his 162-game average gives you 16 home runs, 90 RBIs, and 32 doubles. If he has a season like he did 2024, 2023, extrapolate the 2020 season and what he did there. If you are able to get 30-plus doubles, pushing 40, maybe even 40-plus like he did in 24, and you get 15 to 20 home runs of a guy who hits really well with runners in scoring position, yet he is a free swinger, but his strikeout numbers aren't crazy. Neither are his walk numbers, but that's not his job in the middle of the lineup. If he can kick the can and push the lineup to the next half, that only gives you not only more energy on the base paths, it gives you more a higher likelihood that you can get through the lineup to get back to that top even quicker. So I do understand what you mean. They on the surface, they do need a better 4-hitter. However, if if they get that level of production from Alec Bohm, you can only walk Harper and Schwarber to get to Bohm so much until he racks off his 35th double in your face and gets 100 RBIs like he came so close to those 2 seasons in a row. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but that would be interesting, I think. You'll never find a pitcher to pitch to Harper to avoid having to pitch to Bohm with Harper on first. You're right, but if Bohm keeps coming up clutch, and again, I think that's why you have to have separate. You have to have Harper hitting too. He's a great on base guy too. And hey, if you got to get through Harper and Schwarber to get to Bohm, that's a little bit of a tougher ask, especially when you have a hard nosed runner like Harper and a guy who was the National League hits leader in Trey Turner at the top. Let's not forget about him either. So I think that could be the way that they see success this year is a little bit pressure off of Garcia, a little bit lower in the lineup. Bohm connects the two halves of the lineup, and yeah, you have some free swinging at the bottom. Again, I'm talking about best case scenario. I'm not saying I feel extremely confident in his ability to be that four-hole hitter rather, because he did take a step back last year as far as his production: 18 doubles, 11 homers, 59 RBIs. He did have some time on the injured list, but at 28, you're hoping that the growth continues and not taking a step back as he seemingly did this past year. Now, granted, like I said, he averages, I think the last 2 years prior, he played over 140 games, played over 150 games the year before. He only played 120 this past season. So some things to worry about, some things to be excited about. But I think that if you go into the year with this lineup, Bohm most likely ends up being the 4-hitter just to have more consistent at bats. Whereas Garcia, I think they're going to put him a little bit lower, at least to start the year, and see how he works through some of the changes that they're going to make to his approach. Alex, yeah, I understand what you mean, Alex, but I have a question for you and for a lot of fans out there. If his season was much closer to what he did in 24. So I'm not going to say that he replicates 45 doubles, but he has a season of 20 homers, a season of 15 homers, a season of 31 doubles, a season of 44 doubles. So let's just say last season, instead of 18 doubles, 11 homers, and hitting 287, what if he had 29 doubles or 31 doubles, 32 doubles, and 15 homers? Which is not far off because, again, the year prior, he hit 44 and 15 while hitting 280 and a similar on-base percentage. A little bit better walks, similar K rate. I don't know. Would everybody be talking about moving on from Alec Bohm if he was the guy that he was last year? I don't think so. I understand what you mean by he's just a guy, and I'm not going to dispute that right here today. But if he's just a guy who hits 40 doubles and 15 homers, oh yeah, and he happens to, I'm going to look up his numbers for hitting in the clutch because we know that they were good in the past. I think last year, again, was a down year, so he just needs to get that focus back. But let's just look at runners in scoring position. Where runners in scoring position for his career, he's hit 307 with a 442 slug, a 797 OPS. I mean, he might not be the guy, but for $10 million to get that level of production is pretty damn impressive. At least I like to think so. Let's take a look at this past season. He still hit 285. The slug wasn't there, only a 423 slug, but he hit 285 with runners in scoring position. That's not something to knock, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I think that while you can do better, the financial limitations are real. I know we always say it's not my money, so go spend it, but you have to consider that because you know that the team is considering it. So I think that I'm willing to let the third base market play out to see what kind of offers are there for Alec Bohm, but I'm comfortable, especially if they either add starting pitching depth or another guy to fight for some outfield time or another strong reliever. I think that I feel pretty good going into this season with Alec Bohm being the third baseman. I know that it's the last year and maybe a trade for value, but anyway, that's a lot of talk about Alec Bohm that I didn't think we were going to get into, but that's the beauty of this show, guys. That is the beauty of this show is that we appreciate you guys and we respect your time. So if you're going to give us your time, we want to talk about what you guys want to talk about. I think that is the best way to do it. So, getting into, we touched on JT and the potential alternatives. I personally don't think that that they should move on from JT, but it is going to come down to what that asking price is. And if you can improve elsewhere, that might not be a bad idea to pivot that money and either go heavy on starting pitching, heavy on bullpen, even if it's just for a year, until you have that money due to Nick Castellanos, Taijuan Walker, and Alec Bohm off the books next season, depending on how he goes during the 2026 campaign. Okay. A little bit of a shorter episode today here in the new year. Thank you guys again for tuning in and listening to Alley Talk every single week, every Friday at 2 p.m. here on Philly Sports Network. You can find me and a cavalcade of our wonderful writers, whether it's Sean Nestor, Matt Watson, Alec Costoval, Corey Naito, you name it. We have a huge group of Phillies writers covering awesome stuff all year long for you. Philly Sports Network, we cover everything, not just Phillies, but make sure you give us a follow there. And then, like I mentioned earlier, at Brotherly Glove, at Bro Glove Podcast, at Brotherly Glove Pod, on X, it's at Bro Glove Podcast. So just do yourself a favor, check it out, see what interests you, because we have wonderful coverage. Obviously, hyping you up for the Eagles playoff push. We have some great Sixers and Flyers content as well, and you're going to get all that over at Metro Philly and Philly Sports Network. Now, the final topic that I wanted to get into for the new year, we know what the Phillies need to do, but the big thing for me is how has their top competition fared as far as improvements. So, for me, we're going to take a look at the offseason moves for the National League East, and we are going to figure out where we feel the Phillies still stand in the grand scheme of things. Now, there's plenty of big names still out there as far as the big free agents. We mentioned a few of them. Alex Bregman, Bo Bichette still out there. Of course, Cody Bellinger is still out there. Ketel Marte trade talks are still out there. But the Phillies have made a couple moves, reworking the bullpen, bringing in Adolis Garcia, and they're not the only ones to go and make some big-time moves so far. So let's start with the Atlanta Braves. I think the Atlanta Braves often have been overlooked. You know, they were a 100-win team 2 seasons in a row. Phillies bounced them from the playoffs. They've had their biggest struggle seems to be starting pitching depth and overall health, but I think that you can't really predict that, right? It's just, do you have viable options to carry you when you do have some unfortunate health? And they just did not have that, unfortunately, for them and their fans. They're big free agents that they haven't done anything with. Pierce Johnson, Tyler Kinley, and Connor Siebold, all relievers in that bullpen. They added a lot of pieces to the bullpen, hoping to make up for some of the losses in the rotation when it came to injuries. They didn't want to give up on the campaign, so I actually was surprised by some of the moves that they made, like trading for Siebold late in the season. But they are a team that tries to win and tries to find ways to win in the margins. And some of their moves so far this year have really pointed to exactly that. So we mentioned those. Oh, and then Marcelo Ozuna, a heart of the lineup guy for them, DH. He's also a free agent, unsure where talks are right now. They also lost Alek Manoah, which was a kind of a flyer after he was designated for assignment. And then Nick Allen, the utility infielder, was moved on in a trade with the Astros. That brought in Mauricio Dubon for some additional infield help. I know he's more of a utility guy. He could play infield and outfield. Likely will be in the infield. Maybe challenge Ozzy Albies a little bit, who's taken a step back. They also re-signed Ha-Sung Kim to a 1-year, $20 million deal. Very surprised by the number that he got, but his defense is so good. And he can play all of the infield positions. And he came back from some injuries this past season, but he did have a stellar offensive profile when leaving San Diego. So definitely a guy to I wouldn't say he's the big move, but he's a guy that can improve your improve your team rather. Uh, and don't hate the move for the Braves. Other moves, they not only did they bring back Raisel Iglesias, who's been one of the best closers in baseball the last 5 seasons. They also signed Robert Suarez, the closer in San Diego last season, to a 3-year deal. They have 2 of the top 5 saves leaders in the Major League Baseball over the last 3 seasons in the same bullpen now. Excuse me. Some other minor pieces brought into the bullpen: Ryan Rollison, Joel Pyumps, Danny Young, Ian Hamilton, all brought in on, 3 of them brought in on 1-year deals. Rollison was a trade with the Rockies. And then Mike Yastrzemski will help in the outfield. They've had taken some flyers on some folks as of late. I believe it was Jared Kelnick was a flyer that they took, just hasn't worked out. They signed Yastrzemski. Really solid glove out in the outfield. I think that they feel they can unlock something with him offensively. He did hit pretty well early in his career, 272 as a rookie, 297 in the shortened 2020 season, but has hit 233 or 233 or worse every season since then, with a down year last year, spanning across 2 teams, San Francisco and Kansas City. So not the greatest track record as of late, but another piece that they brought in. The Braves are one of those teams that every time they sign a guy like Mike Yastrzemski, I'm like, really? The Braves went out and got Mike. Why would they go out? And then he's going to have a killer season because that's just what the Braves do, right? They identify these pieces, they go get them, they lock them up for a little bit less money than you might have assumed. A 2-year deal for Yastrzemski stood out to me. I assumed that he would be a 1-year candidate, a 1-year flyer guy. The fact that they even offered him 2 years was huge to me. And that, to me, speaks to their front office and what they are willing to do to improve. So I'm a little surprised that Yastrzemski is the move. Now, they are a team that I feel like is always in the mix, always willing to make a deal. Wouldn't be surprised if they were a team that ended up heavily rumored in the Ketel Marte discussions or another big trade discussion. They've done a lot of big trades and extensions of players in the last few years. So we're going to have to see how that goes. Not as much to talk about. We're going to get to the Mets in a moment. Not as much to talk about with the Marlins and the Nationals. We'll go with the Nationals first. Free agents, Paul DeJong and Derek Law. They lost Jose Ferrer and Josh Bell. They traded Ferrer to the Mariners in what ended up being a big deal, and that a lot of people were upset about here in Philly because they got young top catching prospect from the Mariners, Harry Ford. So Harry Ford, blocked by Cal Raleigh in Seattle. The Mariners and Nationals struck a deal getting, again, Harry Ford and a minor league right-hander for left-handed reliever, Jose Ferrer. Really, really strong left-handed reliever under a lot of team control. A little surprising that they were able to get Ford in that deal, because I think a lot of people looked at Ford as any team that needs catching depth should target this guy. But they chose to go Mitch Garver as the backup for Cal Raleigh and move on from Ford. A little surprising, but they feel like they can backfill that depth elsewhere. And Ford would have been a nice addition if the Phillies could have pulled off a trade for him. They did not. That's okay. But Harry Ford is a player they're going to have to watch up close the next couple of years to see how good of a decision that would have been if they were able to pull that move off. Foster Griffin, also another acquisition, 1-year deal, some starting pitching depth rather for the Nats. Excuse me. Marlins, no notable free agents. Now, I know that the Phillies did sign Brian De La Cruz, but he had been on the outs for them for a little while. They did sign Pete Fairbanks to a 1-year deal, which was very surprising. One of the top names as far as bullpen pieces. A lot of Phillies fans thought that he should be a guy that the team should target. He signs a 1-year deal. I think it was $13 million. He 3 seasons with at least 23 saves. Left the Rays with the 3rd most saves in franchise history. So big move for them. Again, and the Marlins bringing in a guy on a 1-year deal. Maybe his market didn't move as quickly as they thought. So let's get another a 1-year deal on a bad team. I'll get plenty of opportunities there because we're going to be playing close games if we are competitive. Maybe get those numbers up a little bit. They have had some success at the back end of their bullpen recently. He said, I know that I'll be throwing leverage, whether that's the 9th, I'm not sure. It will be the 9th at times. Might end up being the 8th, or if you got to get an out at the heart of the order, I'm sure that's something I'll be doing quite frequently. Again, Fairbanks, his biggest issue was staying healthy. Last season, a 2.83 ERA, 27 saves in 32 chances. Some concerning signs beneath the surface. This is from an MLB.com article discussing the signing from 23 to 25. Fairbanks' strikeout rate declined from 37%, which was one of the best in the majors, to just 24.2%, just barely above league average. Even as Fairbanks posted middling chase whiff and K rates this past season, his elite fastball velocity, 97.3 miles an hour, remained, and he excelled at limiting damage, 93rd percentile barrel rate. His hard four-seamer, he has a slider and some changeup and cutter usage, but big on the fastball and slider. So it'll be interesting to watch him. He is a shutdown type of guy, so if he can stay healthy in Miami, he could be a problem. The Marlins have always played the Phillies well. Can't explain to you why. Even their down years, they seem to play Philly really well. Other moves, they signed Christopher Morel, a guy with a lot of pop, but a lot of swing and miss, inconsistency. And then they did trade for Estory Ruiz, the speedster who was with the Dodgers this past season. They traded for him. They did trade away Joey Wiemer, outfielder, to the Giants, and Dane Myers to the Reds. So some small moves there. I do think that Fairbanks is the biggest thing to worry about there. The other two may very well be on their way out of Miami come the middle of the season. Definitely agree. Steve would have taken Fairbanks. Can't pitch in the cold. We'll have to see about that. I'd love to see the breakdown of that. Not saying that it didn't happen. I just haven't seen those numbers. I'd love to see what he's done just to get a little bit more, a little more certainty around that. The Mets are the big ones. They have all the money in the world, it seems, because they are retooling every single year despite spending more money than anybody else outside of the Dodgers. So signing big names like Francisco Lindor and signing Juan Soto was not enough to keep Pete Alonso around. Alonso leaving in free agency, a 5-year deal with the Baltimore Orioles. Not the only change for the Mets. Their biggest pitching free agent, Edwin Diaz. A lot of people assumed that Edwin Diaz was heading back to New York and that he only opted out to get a bigger contract or an additional year or two on his contract. And instead, he surprised everybody by signing with the Dodgers. He felt a little undercut when the Mets had signed Devin Williams to a 3-year deal, former Milwaukee Brewers closer who struggled with the Yankees last season. I think the intent was for Williams to be the setup man to the reunited Edwin Diaz, and instead he feels spurned and goes to the Dodgers. So that kind of started the feeling that things might not go the Mets' way this offseason. Followed shortly after Diaz leaves, we already talked about the Pete Alonso deal. He leaves as well. They made some retooling moves as well. So they bring in Marcus Semien to play second base, nowhere near the same offensive profile that he used to have when he first signed his massive deal in Texas. However, part of that deal was sending out fan favorite and maybe team captain. And some people may think he's a try-hard with sprinting on walks, but the engine that seemed to keep them going at times, Brandon Nimmo on his way out, headed to Texas. One of the another reason why Adolis Garcia was so expendable for them. They bring in Brandon Nimmo to play the outfield. To replace Pete Alonso, they bring in Jorge Polanco, who has never played first base, and he will now be the first baseman on a 2-year deal. Solid player, but I'm very surprised that the Mets went with Polanco. I think that it felt more like a panic move. I know that may not be the case. After Edwin Diaz leaves, they know that they need to bring in another high leverage reliever, so the Mets pivot to Luke Weaver, former closer in Yankee land. He stays in New York but flips to the orange and blue. Richard Lovelady, he is back on a 1-year deal. We mentioned Devin Williams. Other notable losses after Alonso and Diaz. We mentioned the Nimmo trade just this past week. The Mets traded Jeff McNeil, second baseman and outfielder, and one-time crybaby about a slide that Rhys Hoskins had. He is traded to the Athletics in a not so noteworthy deal, but McNeil to the Athletics. The Athletics are kind of building around that core now. You saw that they extended Tyler Soderstrom, so I'm really just leaning into their core and adding some veterans around. And in this case, Jeff McNeil, the veteran, will bring a little bit of fire to that clubhouse. A lot of the guys that they traded for midseason have also moved on. Tyler Rogers, who was a big-time acquisition at the deadline, he signs with the Blue Jays for a massive deal, the AL champion Blue Jays. Cedric Mullins, 1-year flyer, signing with the Rays, and that almost feels like the perfect place for him. Didn't work out in New York, but I could see big things coming for Cedric Mullins again with what Tampa Bay's been managing to do with players down there for the last decade, it seems. Ryan Helsley, Gregory Soto, both traded for at the deadline. They have both moved on as well. Helsley will be the closer down in Baltimore with the Orioles. Gregory Soto, who felt like a direct answer to Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber. I thought that his acquisition was directly to counter those two guys. Anyway, he moves on. He signs with the Pirates. Danny Young as well over to the Braves from the Mets. So not a major move, but still a move nonetheless. A lot of retooling happening in the NL East. So we mentioned on the Brotherly Glove podcast that I don't know if the Phillies are better based on the moves that they've made so far this offseason. But I don't think that they're significantly worse. Right? I think that it's a retool, it's a retry, it's not a revamping, it's not a resetting of the roster. It's, hey, we have these big contracts out there, so we got to continue to try and compete. Let's see what we can do to retool. It feels a lot like that. And across the rest of the NL East, it kind of feels like that's what's happening. You know, the Braves, if they get healthy, they should be a lot better offensively, but they will be missing Marcell Ozuna. At least everybody kind of assumes that they won't be bringing him back. They've done a little bit of retooling. The Mets are trying to figure out how to be expensive and retool at the same time, kind of a similar problem that the Phillies have. They've done nothing but retool, and their starting pitching depth doesn't do anything for me. I mean, you're talking about who was it? Griffin Canning. Well, he's gone. Frankie Montas. Well, he's gone. Max Kranick. He's gone. Starling Marte is a free agent. Drew Smith, Ryan Stanek, both of those guys are gone. Some fire off the bench. Jesse Winker, he's gone. A lot of things need to be addressed by the Mets, and who knows if it will be at the upper end of the free agent pool. Time will tell. Steve Garrison with the comment, Mets are broken. Lindor and his politics broke the clubhouse. I don't know anything about the politics specifically, Steve, so I'll let you clear all that up in the comments, but I do know that something seems to be off in New York. Lindor was they seemed like the Nimmo trade felt like a clubhouse move more than it did a let's move some things around move. There seems to not be the perfect relationship between Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor. I'm not going to get into BS drama about whose team is it. That does nothing for anybody. But I do think that it's something worth watching. And if you're a Phillies fan and you love to go LOL Mets, this seems like another season of LOL Mets country. So we'll have to see how that plays out for New York. The Atlanta Braves, I'm not sure how much better they are. I think they're going to rely on their long-term contracts and some health. They did add a little bit of depth, and they're always a team that, to me, feels like they're one step away. They're one step away. So I'll have to check that out. Steve Garrison, for those Phillies fans out there, just read the Mike Francesa story about Lindor, and that'll give you all the details. So I'm going to make sure to check that out myself. Make sure you check it out, and make sure you also check us out here, all of our socials. That's right, my social handle on everything at Kyle Fisher 45 on YouTube. It's Kyle Fisher Media. As I mentioned, Brotherly Glove, myself and my brother John just started a new podcast talking all Phillies sports. Our first 2 episodes are live on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. So give us like, rate, and review, whatever you got. Please do that. Appreciate all the support. Again, shout out to our guys, Steve Garrison and Alex in the comments, keeping it lively and light the entire show. That's what the show is here to do. We are here to talk about sports in a fun way. Remember, this is a fun thing that we get to do and waste our time talking about, and some of us even get paid for it. To talk about sports is fun, so let's keep it fun. We're not here to rip each other apart. We're not here for hot take culture. We're here for informed takes. We're here to listen to each other, and we're here to enjoy that we get to talk about a game for a living and spend all of our free time talking about some fun things that the boys used to do in the backyard. You know what I'm saying? Anyway. Appreciate the love. Appreciate all the support. Appreciate all the viewers out there today. Happy New Year. If you didn't catch me at the beginning, that is going to wrap things up for me today. This has been a wonderful episode of Alley Talk. We covered it all. JT, what's the latest status with him? That Colin Newby article, go check it out on 975thefanatic.com. Wonderful reporter over there for The Fanatic. He added the additional details from Realmuto's old agent and how there could be some things under the surface that we're not seeing about what the holdup is thus far. Do the Phillies stick with JT or do they pivot and use that money elsewhere? Only time will tell. The comments were torn on it and differing than my opinion. I think you wait on JT as long as you possibly can. And on top of it, we talked about the rest of the National League East, the biggest competition that the Phillies are going to have. How did they do? How did they improve? I think the Mets are about the same. The Braves bullpen got better. Will they be better? Time will tell. I think they might be a little bit better, but I would still put my money on the Phillies if I were a betting man to take down the NL East crown for the 3rd consecutive season. And if you want to follow along while we cover everything Phillies, check us out at Philadelphia SN on X. Myself and our crack writing staff will be putting together some great content. Our guy, Sean Nestor, just put out a great article, I believe today. Not today, late yesterday. I'm going to confirm. It was yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, about just over 24 hours ago. He wrote a nice article on the not elite, is Harper still elite conversation. So go check that out. For sure, at metrophiladelphia.com, you will find the Philly Sports Network column. Make sure you go there. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the attention. Like, follow, subscribe to Alley Talk if you haven't already. Go check out Brotherly Glove if you haven't already. And we will see you guys next week here on Philly Sports Network, Friday, 2 p.m. for another edition of Alley Talk. If you loved what you heard today, make sure you tune in next week for more of the same. We appreciate it. Love you guys and enjoy the new year.